Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Lyons, one recent cost study estimates that Arizona spends about $5,230 per alien to state taxpayers. This amounts to a whopping, I think, $2.37 billion. What are the overall costs, and particularly, do you mind highlighting a cost that would not be obvious to us? Something that might be a taxpayer cost that's not just right at the, obviously social services, we know we pay for those, but something that people don't expect.
Yuma has a disproportionately high unemployment rate, over 25%. I've been serving as the chairman of the food bank for the last 2 years. We cannot directly supply USDA product to those people coming across, but we support 17 NGOs. And that's one particular cost where we have not received any assistance other than from Governor Ducey and from the LDS Church through Salt Lake, where they've sent me as chairman 500,000 pounds of food, which I was able to distribute to the NGOs. That is one cost that we have borne, and we are appreciative of the assistance that we have received. Our Amberley's Place, where I currently serve as the chairman, is a women and children's emergency services shelter, where it is completely funded by the VOCA grants, which have diminished over the last few years, and then by our community, and we appreciate Governor Hobbs for backfilling that. Other than that, those costs are borne by our community. It's a multidisciplinary shelter where anybody can come and seek assistance. Aside from that, we have a shelter, Crossroads Shelter, and they have received only through the community support assistance.
Yeah, it's the unforeseen stuff like cost shifting in healthcare, and as I understand it, your hospital, people are having to drive 200 miles to have their babies because the hospital maternity wards are all full. Those are costs that just nobody knows about, nobody's adding in. Mr. Melnick, quick question for you. I think it was Mayor Adams who has gotten, really been the most vocal, sort of on the other side of the aisle about all of this, and the president's response has been, well, let's just try to keep all the migrants in Texas. And I don't know if you've seen some of the press where he talked about that, but I thought, and in your presentation and in the ranking member's presentation, there was this net positive. Why would the president want to keep them in Texas if there's a net positive?
Well, I believe, importantly, the program that's been talked about keeping migrants in Texas would be keeping them there for, I believe, about 2 to 3 weeks while they go through the credible fear process. And then if they pass—
Why not? Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, and maybe this is for Mr. Borelli. It's $400, $500 a night for a hotel room in New York City?
Yeah, the quote is about—
I stayed in Dallas the other day. It was like $200 for just a regular room in Dallas. It's $150 at an ICE detention bed. Why don't we put people in an ICE detention bed? I mean, maybe, Mr. Borelli, you can kind of talk about the difference between the empty ICE detention beds and the hundreds of dollars for these hotels where we're putting people.
Sure. I mean, one hotel in New York, the Roosevelt Hotel, the cost that the city's leasing it for is $200 per night, which is actually a discounted rate, it seems. There's 1,000 rooms, so that's $20 million per month, roughly, to pay for that one site. And there's 206 sites being used with similar costs. So, yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful. I think this is one of those areas where Mayor Adams and I would agree that it would be wonderful if some other sanctuary cities around the country would pick up the tabs, especially where there are cheaper hotels available.
This is for you, Mr. Lyons. How is the border crisis impacting? Well, I guess you just really talked about some of the charity services, so I'll go to my next question. Mr. Borelli, can you talk a little bit about education services to illegal aliens and what that's costing the city?
Sure. The cost per student in New York is about $38,000 per student. So we've seen about 20,000 children related to the migrant crisis enter our schools. Now, we have available space in many school buildings around the city. However, where we see the concentrations of hotels is also where we see the concentration of migrant shelters. So when you look at a very small neighborhood, you might have vast overcrowding in certain schools while the school down the block might be available. The impossibility is that folks are coming in 5, 6, 7,000 a month, and even on our best day, the good people of the Department of Education can't figure out how to sort and place these students. Now, the DOE just added $110 million to hire more language-specific teachers and teachers qualified for ESL, but that's $110 million that we were not expecting to spend.
Thank you. My time is up. I now yield to the ranking member for his 5 minutes of questioning.